I haven't done a video in a while on a non-celebrity topic. I haven't done a video on a deeper subject at all lately. And so I wanted to talk about something that I used to teach in my classes, in some of my college classes, and that I've given a lot of thought to. And I think this is really one of the central conundrums of life. And I think that we exert a lot of mental energy to figuring it out. And unfortunately, there's no clear-cut answer. So what I want to do is talk about it, and then I want to give you some different perspectives. And I think you're going to find this to be really interesting and relevant, because I think it's relevant to everyone's life. We all face this conundrum. And that conundrum is the question of what do we owe others, and what do we owe ourselves? What do you owe others, and what do you owe yourself? And this might seem to be, in some ways, kind of a simplistic or a basic question, but actually it structures a lot of conflict that we go through, internal conflict and external conflict that we experience as human beings, this question. And so what I want to do is actually, instead of getting into some of the philosophy right away or getting into some of the perspectives, I actually want to talk about, and bear with me, I know that as soon as this comes out of my mouth, people are going to be like, oh, boring or whatever, right? It's everyone's knee-jerk reaction. But I want to talk about Hamlet. And I'm telling you, even if you have no fucking familiarity with Shakespeare or that play, it doesn't matter. You're going to get something out of this. But I want you to listen to me. I want to tell you the story of Hamlet as it's provided in Shakespeare's play. You know, Hamlet is considered, and those of you who are into literary stuff, you may know this, Hamlet is considered to be Shakespeare's greatest work. It's considered to be one of the greatest works of literature, bar none. And so when people talk about, great literature, they talk about, literary genius. They're talking about something like Shakespeare's Hamlet. It is a tragedy. It is Shakespeare's, I believe it's his longest tragedy. It's a very long play, though. If you had to study it in high school or college, you can probably agree with me on that. And unfortunately, I think that it's often not taught very well. But if you can, keep two things in mind. First of all, you have to remember, and those of you who've seen Shakespeare in Love, you know what I'm talking about. Shakespeare was writing plays to be produced in front of the masses. And so, you would have, might have the elite, some of the elite sitting in the boxes, but on the ground floor, you would have a lot of ordinary people, and it would be very crowded, and it would be a lot of unbathed people and gross people and whatever. And people were coming to Shakespeare's plays to be first and foremost entertained. Okay, they were not, yes, back in Shakespeare's day, there were a number of people of contemporaries who appreciated his genius. But at the same time, the common person who was familiar with Shakespeare, who saw his works, they appreciated how interesting, how entertaining they were. And so it's a shame that today, because it's because the language is difficult for us. And I understand that the Shakespearean language is difficult. And what I tell people is it's a lot like rap music. When I first started listening to rap music in the early 90s, whenever it was, when I, NWA and all that, when I first started listening to rap music, I couldn't understand almost anything what they were saying. But then after listening to more and more rap music, you get sort of an ear for it. And then after a while, you can understand it, right? Well, it's the same thing with Shakespeare. When I studied Shakespeare in high school, when I studied Shakespeare in college, when I would go to a Shakespeare production or I would watch it on TV, on TV or in the movies, I couldn't understand it, right? It was very hard to keep up with any of it. But then after a while of just spending so much time, in school and stuff, as a literature major, and over the years seeing so much of it, I have an ear for it now, right? And once you really have an ear for it, and you can really just get past the language and just take in what's being said, it's really interesting. So I want to talk about what the hell is going on in Hamlet, and what does that have to do with how you live your life and what you owe other people. So you have to understand, that in the play Hamlet, what's going on in this play is that you have this kid, this guy Hamlet, who's young. He's home from college, basically. He's home from Wittenberg, and he's a prince. As a prince of Denmark, he comes home and he finds that his father has been murdered, probably by Hamlet's uncle. The father has been murdered, and Hamlet's mother has now married the uncle. So if you can imagine just, how queasy, a really queasy situation, like you're home in college, you're away at college, and you come home, and your father is dead, and your mother has married the person, this sleazebag, who probably killed him. It was a lot to take, right? And so Hamlet, experiences all of this angst, and he's also depicted as being a depressed character anyway. There's a lot of evidence, and you look in the play, that Hamlet is someone who's suffering from clinical depression, even apart from what's the tragedy that's going on with his parents. But that's neither here nor there for the moment. Anyway, so what happens in the play? Toward the very beginning of the play, a ghost of Hamlet's father, a ghost of the king, appears, okay, and Hamlet hears about it, and so Hamlet wants to go and see this ghost. And so the ghost appears out in the courtyard late at night to these guards, and so Hamlet goes out there, and he hopes to see the ghost, and lo and behold, the ghost of his father appears, and says to him, "Your uncle," who's now married to the queen, "your uncle killed me." And Hamlet says, oh my God, right? And then the ghost of the king, the ghost of Hamlet's father, says to Hamlet, "You must," and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, "You must avenge my murder." In other words, you must find a way to get revenge on my murderer. Now, the problem with this is twofold, okay? First of all, the murderer is now the king, right? The brother who married the widow, and she was the queen, now he's the king. And so for Hamlet to take any kind of revenge against the murderer would be tantamount to treason. And how is treason dealt with traditionally by most governments and most legal systems? It's punishable by death. And often by torture, historically speaking. If you've ever seen Braveheart, at the end, remember when all of that stuff is being done to him, like they're taking his entrails out and they're spitting him around in front of him and everything? Well, that was part of the torture that was reserved during the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance for those who committed torture. And you would be drawn and quartered, which would mean that you would be stretched out basically until like your limbs might be broken, and then you would be tortured in some way, and then your body would be sectioned off, your dead body would be sectioned off and quartered, and it would be, your pieces of your body would be sent to all different parts of England as a kind of a deterrent. Sounds very nice. It's what happens in Braveheart. Now, what is my point with all that? Where was I going with all of that? What I'm trying to say is that what Hamlet's dad is demanding that Hamlet do is basically run the risk of sacrificing his own life. Hamlet's dad says, hey, this guy, who's now the king, he poisoned me and he killed me and took my place. All right? And now you, if you're going to be a good son, Hamlet, you need to go and avenge your father, meaning you need to kill the king, you need to commit treason and give up your life. So basically what the ghost of his father is demanding that he do is that he just hand over his life to him, right? And that he basically just run the risk of being executed, all to avenge his father's murder. And that's one problem, is that it puts Hamlet's life at risk. But the other problem is Hamlet's response. Hamlet doesn't stop and deliberate. He doesn't say, well, gee, Dad, this treason thing is really not what I wanted to do with my life. I'm just now growing up. I'm away at college, basically. I'm just trying to figure out who I am apart from this whole palace thing. And now you're telling me that I have to give up my entire life, run the risk of, torture and execution to avenge your death. Does Hamlet deliberate? Does he do anything like that? No. According to Shakespeare's play, Hamlet immediately gives himself over to what his father is requesting and demanding. And not only does he say, I will do it, but he says, yea, I will wipe from my memory. I hope I'm paraphrasing it correctly, but basically, I will wipe from my memory every other thought or concern save what you have demanded of me now. In other words, I'm going to make what you have demanded of me, Father, the sole intention of my life, the sole focus of the life that I have left. I will wipe from my mind every other concern. And so the real tragedy of Hamlet the play is it's not what happens at the very end when like everybody dies, It's a real trope of tragedy is you have those dead bodies, everywhere, right? But that's not the real tragedy. The real tragedy happens at the beginning of the play when Hamlet just gives up his life's narrative to his father. Just gives it up. And that is why Hamlet will spend the remainder of the play, English teachers, we cry over stuff like this, but that is why Hamlet will spend the remainder of the play in a kind of existential agony, almost unable to move, almost unable to act, constantly neurotically going over this and that and this and that, and basically losing, in a way, kind of almost losing his mind or appearing to lose his mind. It's because he has already given up his life's narrative, and so he is cut off from himself. And he is now going down the road of what the existentialists would call bad faith. Now, the existential philosophers referred to someone as in bad faith if they were in a state of inauthenticity, either to others or to themselves. In other words, when someone is lying to themselves, or when someone makes a decision or goes down a path that is antithetical to one's nature or one's own desires or priorities, then one is said to be in bad faith. And so what we see at the very beginning of the play is Hamlet gives up his life's narrative. He gives up the right to write his own life script, which I believe is a basic right that we all have, a basic kind of autonomy. He gives up that right and to write his own life script. And he goes down this road of chasing after his father, his dead father's demand. You know what he should have said to his dad? Did he think about saying, hey, you know what, Dad? I appreciate where you're coming from and all, but you know, you had your fucking shot and now it's my life, right? Did he think about that? And he could have said it in a nicer way, right? He could have said, you know, gee, Dad, what happened to you is so awful. And, you know, I wish I could, you know, but I can't. It's my life. I can't. But he couldn't say that either. And so this play, Shakespeare's greatest work, arguably one of the greatest works in Western literature, maybe in literature period, is all about a character who shows a profound lack of intentionality about his life, or I should say a profound lack of ownership over his own life. And it takes a real strong will and a real determination to write your own life script. Because there will be too many people in life who will constantly, whether well-intentioned or not, constantly be tearing at you and trying to pull you toward their way of thinking or their view of life or their priorities or what they want for you. And oftentimes it is our parents. You know, I'm speaking generally here. I'm not speaking specifically to my mom who might be watching. But in general, you know, like I said, I used to teach college, and in general, what I would see is in my life and in the lives of others, and probably in the lives of almost everyone, is a great deal of conflict about what we owe our parents. You know, we owe our parents a lot, I would say. If they were good parents. Gets a lot more complicated if they weren't, and it gets even more complicated when you think of the fact that most people are both good and bad, and so it's hard, you know, as an adult looking back, and I know you'll all relate to this, looking back at your parents and trying to sort out the good from the bad and trying to sort of make a cohesive sense of that whole person. But we do, I believe, in general, if they were decent parents, I think we owe our parents a lot of things, you know, love and respect and so forth. But I don't believe we owe them our life script. And there are a number of people who are in a real kind of existential agony because they are on a course, and I see this in my students, you know, the students that I've had when I taught college, because college is a time when people are starting to break away from their parents and starting to try to figure out, okay, who am I and who am I apart from my family or apart from my parents and the way I was raised. And there's a great deal of tension and friction because the child knows that the parent has sacrificed a lot for that child, right? I mean, there's no getting around that. Parents, if they're decent parents, they sacrifice a hell of a lot for their kids in every way possible. And I'm very well aware of that. And that's one reason why I don't have children, is because I just can't do it. And that's not a judgment on whether it's worth doing it or not. Obviously, it's worth doing it for most people, but I can't do it. But I will say, you know, that the fact that our parents sacrifice so much for us, that does create a sense of obligation. And I think quite often, in fact, people believe that they have to sacrifice some fundamental element of their life script to their parents in terms of anything from a career to a religious perspective to choice of a spouse. I mean, I don't know. It's just a lot of people. I know from my own life and the lives of others that a lot of people feel almost entrapped sort of psychologically by this question. Because inevitably, if we are going to live according to our own life script, we must disappoint people, and we must inevitably disappoint those who love us the most and have sacrificed the most for us. And I do understand that parents have sacrificed a lot, and thorny questions of like whether people should put their parents in nursing homes or not or whatever. I haven't gotten to that stage yet, so I don't even feel qualified to dip my toe into that. But I will say that I do not believe that we owe our parents our life script. And I think the tragedy of Hamlet that Shakespeare understood all too well as one of the fundamental psychodramas of our lives is this sense of obligation to the parent, and the sense that the parent sort of looms over us, right? One thing that I like to say is that, yes, I think parenthood is a contract, a kind of a contract, but I think that it's a contract that the parent makes with the child, not that the child makes with the parent. I'm sorry, but just existentially speaking, the child was not there to determine the terms of the contract. And so I don't philosophically speaking understand the perspective that when you have a child, you're doing so with the understanding that child owes you something. And so again, I think there are things that a parent owes a child. I'm not sure. I think it gets a lot thornier about what the child owes the parent. But let's say, in the interest of being as benevolent as possible, let's say that the child owes the parent a lot, but the child doesn't owe the parent his or her life script. And again, that's what Shakespeare is getting at. Now, what happens with Hamlet is that because Hamlet has started off from the beginning on this inauthentic road, he's going to be psychologically tortured the rest of the time, and he's going to do things to trip himself up. That is one of the other central lessons of Hamlet, is that he trips himself up. And this is something that you probably didn't get when you studied Hamlet in high school or college, but I want to let you in on a little moment in the play that's really the crux of the play, and really an interesting moment. Hamlet decides that, well, first of all, Hamlet can't decide whether he's going to kill the king or not. Like he wants to do what his father has told him to do, and he said he's going to. He gave this big speech to his dad, but then when it comes down to it, he really doesn't want to do it, and he's got all of these second thoughts because he knows it's a bullshit narrative that his dad has given him. It's not his own narrative. And so he dillies and he dallies and he obsesses and he whatever. And finally he comes up with this idea. He's excited about this idea, right? For most of the play, Hamlet is really like depressed and lethargic and whiny and just makes everybody miserable and whatever. But he gets really excited about this idea. And this idea is that he's going to stage a play. And by staging this play, he is going to catch the conscience of the king, meaning that Hamlet is going to stage a play in which a man kills his brother, and that seeing that depiction on stage of a brother killing a king, that is going to, he thinks that is going to get a reaction out of the king, because the king is guilty, right? The king has killed his brother and has taken over his throne and his wife and all of that. So Hamlet, a great portion of the play is spent with Hamlet setting up this play and hiring the players and talking about it and everything and staging it. And so anyway, the night comes for the play to be staged, and the king, is in the audience with Hamlet's mother, his new wife, and Hamlet's love, Ophelia, someone else who's trapped by her parents. Basically, her life is ruined by her father, and she basically has to commit suicide because of basically something that her dad has set her up for. But anyway, so everybody's there, and everybody knows that Hamlet is putting on this play. He said to the king and his mother and everybody else, "I hired these people who are going to put on this play. You'll like it." So the play starts. Now, after a while, the pivotal moment occurs. And in this pivotal moment, now listen, this is where it gets tricky, okay? You have to follow me. In this pivotal moment in the play, right, this man is supposed to kill his brother, right? Is supposed to kill his brother, the king, And that is supposed to make the real king think, oh my God, this is about me, and it'll trigger some kind of guilt or whatever, right? But here's what happens. At the very moment when the killer comes on stage and is going to kill the king, Hamlet introduces him. So Hamlet's been kind of narrating this play. So it's like they're all sitting out in the audience and different things will happen on stage, and Hamlet will kind of talk to them and say, this is what's going on here or whatever. Well, at this moment where this character, who's supposed to represent the king, kills his brother, the king, Hamlet says something about it. He introduces this character, this killer, right? And he says, this is one Lucianus, nephew to the king. Does anybody see the problem with this? He says, he's introducing the killer, this guy who's going to kill the king. And he says, this is one Lucianus, nephew to the king. At the pivotal moment, Hamlet commits a Freudian slip. He's supposed to say Lucianus, brother to the king, because that would make sense, right? Because he's trying to show here the brother is killing the brother. And that's what he set it up for. But instead, he has a slip of the tongue. I don't see any other way to interpret it. He has a slip of the tongue, and he calls the killer the nephew to the king. Now, here's the question. Who in the play is the king's nephew? Who in reality? Now, here is the question. Who in reality is the king's nephew? Well, the king's nephew is Hamlet, right? The new king who killed his brother, married Hamlet's mother, took the throne. Hamlet is his nephew. So when Hamlet has this Freudian slip and he introduces the killer in this play at this pivotal moment, and he says nephew to the king, he is unconsciously sealing his own fate. Because at that moment, according to the play, the king rises, is freaked out, right? And runs off. And at that point, that is when the king turns against Hamlet and starts devising a way to have Hamlet killed. Now, the way that has traditionally been read is that the king had this attack of the conscience, right? That he had killed the king, and so he had this attack of conscience, and that's why he ran out. And he plotted to have Hamlet killed because he knew Hamlet was onto him. But if we look at this as a real Freudian slip and not just a mistake in Shakespeare's text, a real Freudian slip, what's actually happened is that the king is freaked out because he thinks that Hamlet has just threatened to kill him. He's just shown him a play where he says the nephew to the king kills the king. So from that point on, Hamlet has set it up so that he has telegraphed his intentions to kill the king. It is basically as if Hamlet were saying to the king, hey, I am going to try to kill you. It's a horrible Freudian slip. And what it indicates, psychoanalytically, is that Hamlet is unconsciously uncomfortable with this mission that he's been given, and he's trying to fuck it up for himself. And that is what we do. When we do not deal with the reality of our doubts or our fears or our conflict, our internal conflict, what happens is when we push it away, we push it into the unconscious. And in the unconscious, it still retains power. It's just an unseen power. And so it comes out. People like Freud and others, we see this all the time, right? People behaving in little ways that betray themselves. People behaving in ways that are self-destructive. People who are not fully into what they're doing, and so they find ways to sabotage. That's what's going on here. Hamlet is sabotaging himself with a Freudian slip that is the crux on which the whole play hinges. Right? Because he knows that he should not have said yes to his dad. And then from then on, you know how the play ends. Hamlet ends up dead. Basically, everybody ends up dead. It's a tragedy. And so what is the lesson from that? Again, the lesson is that we cannot give up our life script to others, but that doesn't answer the question of what then do we owe others and what do we owe ourselves? And there are so many times in life, when we have to say no to people who love us, or we have to say to people, I'm sorry, I don't have time for that right now. Or I'm sorry, I can't come home for Christmas this time because I have to do this. Or I was thinking about that because I have to work. I have to wait tables Christmas Eve and I can't get out of it. And so anyway, I'm going to be missing Christmas Eve for my family. Sorry, family. I really do feel bad about it. Tried to get out of it, but Anyway, you know what? There are just so many times, and you all know what I'm talking about. If I gave you a minute and told you to write down all the times that you've either let your parents down, or you've had to make a decision or do something that they disapproved of, but that you wanted to do, you could probably come up with a long list, and we all can. And it's not just our parents either. It's everyone in our lives. And the more people that you have in your life, and the more quality relationships that you have in your life, the more of a sense of you have of an obligation. But ultimately, I think that there is a basic obligation to oneself. And this is the kind of, freedom, or an individual freedom and responsibility that someone like Nietzsche, for instance, talked about. Or if we think about the philosophy of Carl Jung, Jung said, basically, make a work of art of your life. Live life in such a way so that your life is a kind of a work of art unto yourself. That is your own individual life. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. One day I'll talk about it. It's a really just profound, amazing work. And it was written by a man who lost his family in the Holocaust, almost died, was at Auschwitz, lost everything. And then he was a psychiatrist. He wrote this book about finding meaning even in the midst of suffering. But one of the things that he talks about is the significance of living your life with a kind of intentionality. And he brings up at one point something I've talked about before called the deathbed perspective. I don't think he actually uses this term, but that's how I call it. And he says that we would all do well to imagine ourselves many years, hopefully down the road, and on our deathbeds, and ask ourselves, what will we want to look back and see about our lives? What dreams will we want to see that we pursued? What kind of an ethic do we want to see that we lived by? What kind of relationships were important to us? All of these things, right? That can and often do encompass other people. But the point is, it is an individual narrative. And philosophers like Heidegger, for instance, understood this notion that ultimately life is about the individual and the individual experience. Heidegger famously said that that our lives, that society basically determines the way that we live in denial of death. That he called it the they. The they tells us that we can't think about death, that it's not going to really happen to us, that we should just push it away. Whereas Heidegger says that, in fact, it is essential to think about one's mortality, because once you realize that you are going to die individually, you came into the world individually, you're going to die individually, and that you ultimately will have to answer for your life individually, whether you're answering to some kind of God or whether you're answering just to yourself as you look back on your life and you on your deathbed or in your last moments and you survey what you've done with it. And once you realize that your life is existentially that of an individual, no matter whether we all are one or not in a larger existential sense, and I believe that we are. I believe that those Eastern notions of everything being one and all that are true, but our mortal lives and our existential lives in this world of being and time, as Heidegger would call it, they are ordered by that kind of radical existential individuality and individual freedom. And we owe other people a hell of a lot, but we do not owe them our narrative. And so once you realize that you individually are going to die individually, and then it should give you the freedom to break away, Heidegger said, from the they. Heidegger called it the illusions of the they, that we must break away from the illusions of the they and realize that it is up to us to seize and live our own kind of a work of art, as Jung would say. And that doesn't mean that you say, oh, well, I don't give a shit about what other people say. It doesn't mean that you go through life not feeling the pain of others or the pain that others put onto you at times, or that you don't go through life feeling this angst about letting people down. All of those are things that must be experienced and can't be avoided, but it is healthy. And this is what so many of the philosophers say. This is why Plato wrote, the unexamined life is not worth living, because if you don't examine your life, you can't even begin to take a kind of individual responsibility for it that you should. This is my life. This is my life narrative. And again, that doesn't mean that there are not numerous times in life when you won't give up your will to someone else. I do it all the time, right? I want to do something, my guy wants to do something else, and so, okay, whatever, But it does take a special kind of discernment, and I think a discernment that is very important to have or to develop, to know when that ultimately you answer to yourself. You know, I'm not a Christian. I was raised a Christian. I had a born again experience. Who knows? Maybe one day I come back to it. Maybe one day I'm on a stage with Kanye West at a prayer service. No, that's just a joke, okay? Gotta have a sense of humor, Manson fans. I actually am going to do a video very soon. It's one that I've had in the works for a while, where I talk about Christianity, because one of the things that I used to teach in college, actually, as a part of my literature course, was I would actually teach a kind of a Christianity appreciation seminar, or I had a series of lectures that I did in class where I talked about the beauty of Christianity, the beautiful aspects of it, and the deeper meaning of it. And it's not the sort of thing that you might expect to get either in a college class or in church. It's maybe a little something in between, something that's reverent, but also secular. So. I'll do that at some point. I'm trying to get that together. I think that'll be kind of interesting, since Christianity has been in the news lately, connected with the Marilyn Manson thing. But you know, it's interesting to me when we look at the story of Christ. You know, Christ is often held up, and rightly so, but Christ is often held up as the exemplar of human behavior. And, you know, what would Jesus do, you know, from years ago, that really famous saying that people had on their wrists for a while, you know, the little WWJD bracelets. Okay, this might be before some of your time. All right, I'm aging myself rapidly now. Is that still a thing? WWJD? I don't know. But anyway, one of the interesting things about the story of Jesus is that he kind of put his mom through hell. Now, don't go get all upset or whatever. I'm not saying he was like a bad son in the sense that he was like, fuck you, Mary, or anything like that. Or, you know, he was out getting wasted every night. And I know, when he was a teenager. I'm not talking about that, okay? What I'm saying is, he rather, I would say, you know, ruthlessly abided by his higher calling in life. That he knew that he was on, according to the story, you know, it's about a guy who knows that he is part God and that he is on a larger divine mission than just to make his parents happy. You know, if you think about it, there's a really interesting story. I tell you what, think about two things, okay? First of all, think about the fact that that Christ going to the cross meant that he had to put his mother through just really the worst kind of psychological and emotional torture that you could imagine. I mean, crucifixion, it was hardcore and it was horrible. You know, I guess the Mel Gibson film does it justice, but still though, you know, it was a horrible way to die, and it was intentionally made horrible because the Romans wanted the ultimate deterrent. In fact, there are a number of historical stories where the Romans crucified thousands upon thousands of people at one time to really make an impression. For instance, when Spartacus and the slaves revolted, that was a big thing in ancient Rome. Well, what did the Romans do? They set up on this main road to Rome, they set up thousands of these crosses and crucified these people, right? I mean, ancient society was really barbaric, you know. You think about like little kids and their parents, you know, going down the road, Mommy, what's all these people, right? But the way that someone would really suffer through crucifixion is through a kind of slow asphyxiation. That's the way people died. I mean, I know in the story of Christ in the Gospels, he dies earlier, he gives up his spirit. But generally, people would linger on the cross for days, and they would asphyxiate very slowly, because once they would have to inevitably sink down into this kind of position, they wouldn't get enough air. And so the experience of someone on the cross was of constantly pushing up on the nails and being pulled down back and forth in this horrible, painful cycle, trying to choose between, you know, one kind of pain or asphyxiation on the other. Now, why am I getting all that graphic with you? Well, I just don't think that we really take these stories sometimes seriously enough. And I don't mean seriously as like it really happened, but seriously as in like really like thinking about what this story is describing. And Christ put his mom through that. He did. He could have said no. He could have chosen not to. But he knew that he had a script, he had a mission, he had a narrative to fulfill. And it was not to save his mother from suffering, or to save himself for that matter, right? But I want you to think about another story. It's really interesting in one of the Gospels. This is one of the few stories that we get about Jesus's upbringing, about the time between being born in a manger and then in his 30s fulfilling his mission and so forth. And it's this story about when he's, and I can't remember how old he is in the story, but he's older than a little child, but not quite adolescent, right? I can't remember, it was like 12. Anyway, in the story, Jesus runs away from his parents. They're on a trip to Jerusalem. They're on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And Jesus runs away from his parents. And his parents, they search for him for like days because he's run off and they don't know where he's gone. And so his parents, they find him finally after like days of searching for him. They find him in the temple. He's escaped and gone on ahead of them because he wanted to hang out in the temple. And they rush up to him and they're all like frazzled and upset, I'm sure. And like, what the fuck? Well, they probably weren't like that, but you know what I'm saying. And according to this gospel account, he says to them, why were you looking for me everywhere? Don't you know I would be in my Father's house? He gives them this really kind of like asshole sort of response. You know, it's not, oh, I'm so sorry, or I didn't mean to make you worry, or oh, forgive me or anything. It's like, I had to go to my Father's house, dude. And sometimes I think that we would be well served in life as much as we care about other people in our lives. And I'm not just talking about parents. I'm talking about spouses, significant others. I'm talking about boyfriends, girlfriends. I'm even talking about children sometimes. And that's a whole other thorny issue. And we can talk about that in a later video. But I do think that there are many important moments in life and moments of decision when we have to say, you know, I had to attend to my Father's business. There's so many times in life when we have to say to other people, you know, I've got a different mission I'm going about right now. It's just not in line with what you want. Sorry. You know? If you've ever seen the movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey, it's one of my favorite movies, even though I couldn't tell you what the fuck is going on at the end. I know they've like created like a tesseract or something, and he's using the magnetic stuff to send her signals and what, but come on, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And then it spits him out at the end of the whole thing in Interstellar. He gets spit out and he just like happens to get picked up at this place where he needs to be so that he can rejoin with his daughter who's now aged profound. It just doesn't make any sense. But okay, whatever. I still love the movie. Christopher Nolan. You gotta love his movies. I love Tenet. And I lectured on Tenet last semester in my college class. So I might do a lecture on Tenet. That's really cool. If you talk about what Tenet is about, it's all about faith, right? Even what does the word Tenet even mean? What is the sign that they use? It's all about faith. But anyway, but going back to Interstellar, so Matthew McConaughey's character, he knows that he's going to have to get on a shuttle in order to fulfill this larger mission for humanity. And he knows that it's going to take him away from his daughter, and that his daughter his little girl, his little child, his beloved daughter that he's so close to, that he might never see her again. He is robbing her of a father. That's what he's doing. And he knows it. Because he's probably never going to come back, or if he comes back, it might be like what happens in the movies decades later or whatever. And she's missed all that. He's destroyed her, right? Life without a father. And in this scene, before he goes, he's lying in bed next to her and she's crying and she's like, I don't want you to go or whatever. And he says, you know, when you were born, my wife said to me, we now exist only to be ghosts of our children's futures. He said, when you were born, my wife said to me, your mother said to me, we now only exist to be ghosts to our children's futures. Meaning that what we want is no longer relevant. It's all about creating as nice a past for them so they can look back at it as adults and look back at that, right? But Matthew McConaughey's character says to his little girl, he says, I'm sorry. I can't just be a ghost right now. I've got to exist. I've got to exist. In other words, I have to claim my own existence. I have to do that. And I just think that's a really significant and a really powerful idea. And I know that there are many times in life when we have to put aside what we want and maybe even in some of those big decisions. But I also think that the individuality of life is a beautiful thing and a God-given thing. And it's kind of like, you know, going back to Braveheart, it's kind of like in that pivotal scene in Braveheart when he's standing in front of all the guys and he's trying to motivate them to go and fight the English, which they see, which his fellow Scotsmen and Irishmen see as futility. In fact, one of them even says, "We can't fight them. They're too many." And he's trying to get them to fight. And one of them says, he says, "We'll run away, but at least we'll live." Yeah, we're going to run from this fight. No, we're not going to fight him. We're going to run, but at least we'll live. And William Wallace says to him, Mel Gibson's character says to him, I don't know why I'm quoting Mel Gibson so much in this, except he does make movies that I love. You know, he might be a fucked up guy in real life and anti-Semite or all of that, right? But you have to admit, Braveheart, Apocalypto, Hacksaw Ridge, some damn good movies, right? Sometimes I wonder if there's a link between people who are, you know, I mean, I think we know there's a link between people who are emotionally unstable and even sometimes very problematic and great artists. But anyway, go figure. But he says to these guys that want to run away, they want to run away so they can save their lives. He says to them, yeah, fight and you may die, run and you'll live. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all of your days from this day to that for just one chance to tell the English that they may take our lives, but they will never take our freedom? Now, what is he getting at there? He's saying there are things higher and more important than just living, even if that living is for your family. Like, he was talking to family men, right? Come on. They're having big families. Well, of course, infant mortality was pretty high, but they're having multiple children if they can, right? And so they have mouths to feed. They have women depending on them back home. They have these family lives in front of them. He's asking them to give up their obligation to others for a higher principle of freedom. And I'm not saying if what he's asking is right or not. I'm not saying if it's right to trade family for freedom or not. You know, if you know the story of St. Thomas More, that's an interesting thing. He chose to give up his family life and everything for a principle, and he was executed for it, right? There's another question. And yes, I know that he also was an asshole at times. But anyway, but this question of whether there is something beyond what we owe others, that if there is a higher destiny for us, and maybe it doesn't have to be, you know, fighting the English or dying on a cross, I hope not. But you know what? We all have our own smaller destinies to fulfill, and we're all different. We're all different psychologically, physically, in terms of aptitudes, abilities, experiences, and that difference has to mean something. And yes, while it means that we can oftentimes help others in our lives and have relationships with others in our lives, and that we owe others in our lives things, it doesn't mean ultimately that we owe them our life's narrative. That is our own. And you know, life goes by, here's the thing, life goes by so fast. And it really feels, and I used to tell my students this all the time, because you know, even though I look young, I'm a little bit older. I'm not college age anymore. And I used to tell my students all the time, you know, the older you get, the more you will understand and experience life as a wind tunnel. It is like a wind tunnel in that we are trying to go from point A to point B to point C, you know, sort of walking down, struggling down the wind tunnel. But while we're doing that, while we're trying to make forward progress, life is the wind tunnel is throwing all of this stuff and all of these people by us, right? And there's people here who want our attention and people here who want our attention. And there's this thing over here and there's this project that we were asked to do, or there's go out with these people. And life is a kind of an art of figuring out what to grab and what to let pass by. It is. And again, that is one of the big conundrums. What do you grab and what do you let pass by? And how do you know the difference? So I hope some of that makes sense. I don't know why I'm about to cry right now, but I guess it hit a nerve somehow, somewhere with me. But that's literature and that's philosophy, right? So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I plan to make more of these types of videos. And if you appreciated this, I'd love it if you'd give me a small tip on PayPal and write me a little note telling me that you like this video. It does encourage me to make more of them because generally the videos that get the most views and donations are the celebrity videos, which I understand. But I really like doing these. All right. Have a great night. Bye-bye.